Alert, brought to you by Egan Insurance Agency.
All right, good morning. It is 10 a.m. I'm meteorologist Chris Franklin, joined by meteorologist Dave Nussbaum in the Pinpoint Forecast Center, and we've been closely now watching Tropical Storm Nate. It was upgraded earlier this morning. Tropical Storm still a good distance away from us. However, once it does get kind of toward the Yucatan and then into the Gulf, it is going to be a very fast-moving system. So we're not going to even be talking about this for very long, but that also means we have very little time to prepare for it as it moves inland.
And big changes overnight from what we saw right now. You'll see here, we'll go ahead and show you the latest information with this storm. You can see there again, it's currently working its way here. The Newton update just now coming in at 10 o'clock. Winds are still 40. It's a tropical storm, but now inland over Nicaragua, and winds are at 40, moving northwest at 9 miles per hour. It is expected to go back into parts of the northwest Caribbean, intensify there. You can see from 40 to 65 mile per hour storm, just clipping the far northeastern corner of the Yucatan Peninsula. And as it does, again, kind of impacting the Cancun area. And then from what we saw and I talked about all morning, now a more westward shift in the track. It's still the same as it was this morning, but we now have it there becoming a Category 1 hurricane in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and then working its way there on into the southeast Louisiana area. You'll see there as a Category 1. This should be roughly 7 o'clock on Monday or Sunday morning. So 7 a.m. on Monday. We're still looking at this one continuing to be working its way into southeast Louisiana there. And as it does, again, just above a minimal hurricane status. But again, the bigger threats with this will continue to be some of the wind as well as the surge with it. But as Chris mentioned, a fast-moving storm. Look at that. By 7 a.m. on Monday, it's already on into eastern part of Tennessee. So the system's not going to be lasting very quickly over the area. Timing of this right now, rainfall, heavy rain would start to rise Saturday morning, not necessarily from Nate, but a little disturbance out ahead of it. And it continues through Sunday night with 2 to 4 inches of rain, at least at this point, possible. So again, that would be manageable for us, which is some good news. Tropical storm force winds would start to arrive along the coastline by 10 a.m. on Saturday and continue through Sunday. And tides and surge, at least at this point, surge potentially 2 to 5 feet above what we're seeing already. There's higher tides out there.
And that's been a big
starting
problem
on Sunday morning. And that may actually be our biggest issue we have moving forward as we go on into, again, a potential for the storm to work its way through the area. Now, things can change, as we already saw in the last 24 hours, with models shifting back and forth, but at least the consensus this morning is that more, unfortunately, of a southeast Louisiana landfall.
Yeah, and it does look like, and some of the models have been trending a little bit more and more westward, which would put southeast Louisiana, coastal Mississippi more on the wet and the stronger side of the storm. Again, if there is any good news, is that models have been fairly consistent. Now, again, the track has been changing. Forecast for the strength has been fairly consistent in calling for the storm to be a minimal hurricane as it moves toward coastal Louisiana and then quickly moving northward. So this is not going to be something that we have to deal with for very long. It'll basically be a weekend storm, and by Monday, conditions are already starting to improve in the area. So this is going to be a very fast-moving system. However, some of the probably greatest impacts are going to be those strong winds as it does approach the coast and move inland, and then coastal influences. Tides are going to be running with that surge coming up about 2 to 5 feet or maybe greater, depending on the strength of the storm. But tides have already been running high. So all of those areas, the low-lying areas outside of the levee protection system that have already been inundated with the waters, with those strong easterly winds over the last couple of days, we're going to continue to see those waters come up over the next few days.
And we will continue to, of course, watch the latest here with the Nate as it continues to work its way through the Caribbean over the next couple of days. We're going to go live on Facebook here coming up after this. Going to get you back to your regular programming, and we'll continue our coverage and explain why the storm is going to be taking the track it's going to take and what could influence it from either getting stronger or weaker, and what some of the latest models are talking about. So if you're on Facebook, go ahead and we're going to continue our update on there as well. But now let's go back to regular programming here on Channel 4.
This has been a Pinpoint Weather Alert, brought to you by Egan Insurance Agency.
Southeast Louisiana. Saturday, our rain chances will start going up. Kind of an unassociated disturbance that'll be coming in from the east, kind of moving across the Gulf. And then Nate. And actually, it'll be kind of interesting to see how that feature interacts with Nate, and if that little surface low, that little vorticity system, right, if it kind of interacts with Nate at all. If it doesn't, it we may not see much influences. But it'll be interesting to see what happens once this does get into the Gulf. It's not going to make Nate stronger. It would actually kind of weaken and draw some of the energy away from Nate. And that may be why the models have been going with more of the low-end hurricane.
Which we'll take. Now, this morning, one of the trends we saw was that now that the European, which was more into Florida yesterday, is now into Louisiana, which is a big difference. The other is that low you're talking about, the American model, actually kind of takes that low and helps to rip apart Nate.
Right.
Not necessarily getting rid of Nate, but at least a significantly weaker system to maybe just a little low, if anything.
Right, and what was interesting, and again, we don't want to discount it at all, but we're trying to find any positive news to just kind of give you all of the scenarios. I was looking at the 6Z run, the most recent run of the GFS, which is the American model, which, on a side note, was interesting that the GFS model runs all had the cluster coming to southeast Louisiana, and the Hurricane Center was saying, well, it's not initializing, we're going to kind of discount that and go with the Euro. Well, looks like they're now all coming in line with the GFS. So for at least Nate, the GFS has been the more accurate of the models, although we'll have to wait and see what happens on Sunday morning as to whether or not that happens. But the 6Z run actually has that little feature that'll be coming across the Gulf ahead of Nate, kind of rotating around, and it almost looks more like an open wave coming at the Louisiana coastline, which would mean maybe depression strength coming at us, which would be fantastic.
That would be great news.
Again, the models, though, are still indicating Category 1, and that is where the Hurricane Center is leaning right now. Again, that can change, and we're going to continue to see some changes as it moves over Nicaragua, Honduras, and then possibly if it moves over the Yucatan. All of that influence of land is going to help to disrupt the center of circulation and any kind of convection trying to get going in the center, which once it gets back out into the Gulf water, or gets into the Gulf waters, it'll be
make a difference.
Wait to see if it is able to even organize itself again.
Now, one thing to also consider, though, is this is October. This isn't August or September, where we're traditionally known for our hurricanes coming on, Ed. Water temperatures are very warm in the Caribbean.
Right.
The Northwest Caribbean traditionally is known as an area where storms, when they hit that this time of year, can explode.
Right.
Because it's very warm, deep water there.
Right.
And so we are expecting it to be from a weak tropical storm to a strong tropical storm by the time it gets to the Yucatan.
While it's moving, right.
While it's moving. And then once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, water temperatures in the southern part of the Gulf are fairly warm in the mid-80s.
Low to mid-80s.
Only around 80 as you get to the Louisiana coastline. Normally in the summertime, we're mid-upper 80s here. So our water temperatures are down a little bit. You need 80s the minimum threshold for a tropical system. So those features have to be considered as well. And there's a lot of things we talked about all morning and tried to explain as much as I
know.
could.
There's so much going into it.
This isn't just a clear cut, and this is what's going to happen.
Right.
So when we factor all those things together, that's how we get our forecast and what we're looking at. And at this point, as you just mentioned, still Louisiana landfall. I think some of our biggest issues, the way things look at this time, again, this could easily change 10 times over before potential landfall Sunday morning here in southeast Louisiana. The surge could be an issue. Because water levels are already high from the onshore flow. Coastal flood advisory continues through Sunday noon now. Right. And then a surge on top of that potentially. So that could be some issues. We're also looking at the winds, maybe power outages. You know, we get a lot of power outages around here.
Doesn't take much to get a power outage, right.
So that could be an issue for us too. Mississippi coast and the North Shore as well. Right. So don't want to forget those areas too. And the rainfall, though, may not be a huge issue.
Right. It doesn't look like rain is really going to, this doesn't look like to be a major rain maker anyway. It looks like it's going to be a fairly small storm. And with it moving so fast, it's not going to have a lot of time to just sit. This isn't a Harvey. Right. And it's certainly not even a tropical system that is associated with a lot of rainfall. It's going to be a fairly small, fast-moving system. We may get 2 to 4, maybe a bit greater in some spots, but we saw our August 5th storm produce more rainfall than even that. So this may not be a huge rainmaker. Winds certainly, and some damage from those strong winds. We'll likely see some probably weak, short-lived tornadoes from that as well. But I'd say coastal flooding, the surge, and then some of the stronger winds are probably the two biggest risks that we're looking at from Nate. And again, by Monday, Tuesday, conditions are improving, and it looks like by the middle to end of next week, we get a fairly strong cold front to move through.
Fall weather.
Right, and really fall weather.
Really nice weather. So, and the thing about the rainfall, though, that's going to occur over an extended period of time. Right. Not in 1 hour. No,
the 2 to 4 inches we're talking about total from the entire time of the storm, not from one thunderstorm. This is from the entire event.
And that will make a difference, especially
make
when
a
it comes
huge
to the
difference.
flooding and the street flooding and stuff like that too, because it won't be just one thunderstorm. So I know there's a lot to consider with
There
that.
is a lot. And
Let's break it down a little bit here,
Yeah.
what we're looking at. So going back, recapping here, we'll just start with the latest track here. And excuse me, now we currently have, of course, tropical storm Nate. Winds are at 40, making landfall in Nicaragua right now, moving northwest at 9. Forecast models here, you can see the spread is still pretty wide. We're going from almost Cameron Parish there, not too far away there from, say, Vermilion Parish, all the way to the Mississippi coast. And really, if you keep going with this, it'll take its way all the way toward Mobile Bay. So
Right.
we're looking at a large still area where the models are not agreeing. The trend is the northwest motion.
Right.
But the path is still different. And then here, of course, is what we're looking at with, again, the potential there. Again, making landfall now. It may briefly weaken to a tropical depression before emerging back in the northwest Caribbean, strengthening because the warm water out there and really fairly low wind shear at this point.
Right.
Then now a hurricane in the central part of the Gulf of Mexico, as you saw there. That would become a hurricane now 7 a.m. on Saturday, then work its way northward here on into Louisiana and kind of making landfall there right around 7 a.m. on Sunday as a 80-mile-per-hour hurricane. Lower Plaquemines Parish area and heading up toward the Mississippi coast as well throughout the morning hours and gradually and quickly, I should say, working its way up through Mississippi, Alabama into Tennessee by Monday morning. So this would be long gone by the time we get back into play on Monday.
Still a lot of factors to consider when looking at the potential strength and future track of the storm. And as we know all too well, any slight variation west or east, especially with a very small storm, is going to be huge in the impacts of what we're going to see along the northern Gulf Coast. So what we're looking at for the next couple of days is likely landfall, very likely landfall, along the northern Gulf Coast is probably a weak hurricane. So that's what we need to keep in mind right now, and you need to make your plans accordingly. You can't, because our region is so diverse in terrain and where folks live, obviously for folks in very low-lying areas, the bayou parishes near the coastline, areas that already have standing water, it may be a good weekend to get out of town for a day or two before, only because if we do see flooded streets or flooded areas, you might be stuck for a day or so before the water finally recedes. And then, of course, if the power goes out, that's going to be more of an issue as well. But as far as this is not a massive evacuation type event, folks. This is not something that we're watching that is going to cause great concern that everyone needs to evacuate for right now. And again, things can change, and we have seen storms kind of explode in strength suddenly. It just looks as though right now the conditions in the Gulf and the fast motion that is anticipated with this storm once in the Gulf, it doesn't look like it is really going to have that chance of intensifying rapidly once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. In the Caribbean, very likely. As a matter of fact, as it gets back over the warmer waters of the Western Caribbean, once it moves over or past Honduras and Nicaragua, it is not unlikely that we could see maybe this become a hurricane before making landfall in the Yucatan. Now, Hurricane Center keeps it as a strong tropical storm as it moves toward the Yucatan, but again, very mountainous terrain that it's over right now. So the next 12 hours will be interesting to see what happens with that circulation as it is moving over very mountainous land. Nicaragua and Honduras, especially right where it is fairly mountainous. You got a little bit of the coastal plain, but it is fairly mountainous, so that does help to disrupt that center of circulation. And the storm itself is right now over land and again very mountainous. But over the course of the next day or so, or I should say really the next 12 plus hours, it's going to be moving back over open water and again very, very deep warm water in the Western Caribbean. So I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, to see this become a hurricane before even reaching the Yucatan. That is still very, very possible. Hurricane Center maintains it as a tropical storm, which is fine. But then once in the Gulf of Mexico, we're going to see a very fast moving system. Again, Saturday morning just off the coast of the Yucatan in the southern Gulf. And then by Sunday morning, 7 a.m., making landfall, or if nothing else, very near land along the Louisiana or Mississippi coastline. Quickly moving inland, and then again by Monday, this storm center is already in Tennessee and we're basically done talking about it. I'm actually kind of building my 7-day forecast right now, and it looks like our rain chances on Monday about 30 to 40%. So rain coverage considerably drops. This weekend, though, right now is looking pretty wet and windy, especially on Sunday as the storm moves toward land. I'm going to jump over here and look at our wind forecast. Now, the yellows and oranges are your tropical storm force winds. So the tropical storm force winds, notice how small this is. This does not affect a very large area at all. As it moves toward the tip of the Yucatan, really just the tip of the Yucatan will experience a tropical storm force winds. Now, obviously, as it strengthens, you're going to start to see those increasing wind, or the wind field expand a bit as well. But we're looking at probably tropical storm force winds here, or at least along coastal Louisiana, by Sunday morning. Even Saturday, winds will be increasing, but probably not reaching the sustained winds of a tropical storm. That won't occur until early on Sunday. Our forecast actually stops. The wind radii forecast only go out 3 days, so beyond 3 days, it's already inland over southeast Louisiana, and also once it's inland, we no longer see those strong winds. However, we're looking at by Sunday morning and Sunday into the midday hours, tropical storm force winds from really the North Shore and all of South Shore and down toward the coast, maybe nearing hurricane force winds right near the center of the storm. And then, well, if it's a hurricane, you'll have hurricane force winds right near the center of the storm. And then those strong winds continuing out toward the Mississippi coast and lower Alabama. But again, if this forecast trends more west and puts more of southeast Louisiana on the wetter side, then we'll probably get into more of those stronger winds. Again, it's not going to last for very long. We're trying to give you any optimism in this storm track, and that it's not going to last for very long. This is not in a major evacuation type storm. I know it's very costly to evacuate. I know a lot of folks don't want to have to evacuate. For many of us, this is not the type of storm that you're evacuating for. This is the type of storm that you've got your supplies, you're prepared to just kind of hang at home for a couple of days, and by Monday, Tuesday, you can kind of clean up the debris, and we're back to normal as we head into next week. This looks like primarily a weekend storm that will be starting to see the conditions here deteriorating by Saturday and continuing on through Sunday night. Now, again, that's as it is right now. Things can change, and we know that they can dramatically change sometimes. Let's take a look at a couple of the computer models. The GFS is the one now that a lot of the models are in a better agreement with, but you still saw that spread in the model run from our, we call the spaghetti plot. There is still a pretty decent spread, and with a smaller storm, that's huge because farther to the east, and we feel very little or minimal impacts here in southeast Louisiana if it's more toward Mississippi, Alabama, or still perhaps Florida. If it's more central Louisiana, then obviously that puts southeast Louisiana on the worst side of the storm. But we are not talking about a massive, major storm. Here's the GFS model. Again, you kind of see, and I'll go to our pointer here so you can see what I'm talking about. There's a center of circulation. Now, the GFS has been fairly consistent in really bringing it over more land in Honduras and Nicaragua and much farther inland over the Yucatan. And again, more time over land means it's going to continue to weaken before it gets back into the Gulf. And notice this, again, the new model run does have what is maybe left of Nate by noon, or excuse me, midnight on Sunday, not noon, just off the southwest Louisiana coastline. So the GFS keeps pushing farther and farther west, which puts us on the wetter side. But also notice this is a fairly unorganized system, or if nothing else, a very minimal, maybe depression or weak tropical storm as it moves into southwestern Louisiana and then gets lifted northward. Here's the European model run. European model has minimal impacts over land across the Nicaragua, Honduras, and then also the Yucatan. So the European is a stronger storm once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico and still kind of towards southeast Louisiana, moving inland and then quickly northward. So the European is a stronger storm, more towards southeast or coastal Mississippi, southeast Louisiana or coastal Mississippi, stronger because it doesn't have nearly the influences of land. The GFS has a far weaker storm farther to our west, but that's because it has more interaction with land. Still a lot that can happen. Here's what's going on right now, and something that some of the computer models have not really been doing a good or not really a very good grasp of, is this big upper level low. And I'm going to show you this right here. and very, very dry air across much of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, we're likely going to see a lot of this dry air push farther off to the west and may not influence Nate, but sometimes computer models have a very difficult time taking into account this dry air, which can rapidly weaken a storm. So this will be something that we'll watch over the course of the next couple of days. Again, the way it's setting up right now, we're looking at likely landfall in coastal Louisiana, coastal Mississippi by early on Sunday morning as possibly a strong tropical storm or weak hurricane. Right now, the forecast is for a weaker hurricane with winds of 80 miles an hour. We're going to continue to monitor this closely over the course of the next couple of days, but please stay with us for Eyewitness News at noon. We'll have much more detail. We're also going to be cutting into programming on the main advisory times when we get new forecast data in. So possibly at 1 o'clock, definitely at 4 o'clock this afternoon, but we will always have more information on Facebook, Twitter, and our website, wwltv.com. For now, I'm meteorologist Chris Franklin in the Pinpoint Forecast Center.